Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, today let's challenge something pretty fundamental about money. What if I told you rich people actually love debt?
hmm
That, for them, it's not a weakness, it's a weapon, a strategic tool.
Yeah, that definitely flies in the face of, well, everything most of us heard growing up, right?
Exactly.
Like, don't borrow if you can't pay it back, or, the dream is being totally debt-free, that whole idea.
Right, the classic advice. Financial freedom equals zero debt.
And look, that's solid advice for, say, credit cards or maybe a car loan, consumer debt, but what our sources show is that the wealthy, they often play a whole different game with borrowing. It's a fundamentally different philosophy.
Okay, so that's the key. If that traditional view isn't the whole picture, how do the wealthy flip the script?
Yeah.
That's what we're digging into today, why they embrace it, and, crucially, how they use it differently.
Well, the absolute core difference is what they use the debt for. They're generally not borrowing huge sums for liabilities. Things that just drain your wallet. Super fancy cars, designer stuff, things that depreciate the moment you buy them.
Things that make you look rich but not actually build wealth.
Exactly. Instead, they strategically use borrowed money debt to acquire assets, things that generate income or appreciate in value.
So it's not just about avoiding bad debt, it's about actively using good debt.
Precisely. It's seeing debt as capital, a tool to grab opportunities that might be bigger than their current cash on hand allows. It lets them scale.
Let's make that really concrete. We found a great example, right?
Yeah, a really clear one. Imagine an investor borrows, say, $500,000.
Okay.
And let's say the interest rate is 5%. So that costs them $25,000 a year in interest payments.
Right. Simple math.
Now, instead of buying a yacht, they use that borrowed $500,000 to buy an apartment complex. And that complex brings in, let's say, $60,000 a year in rent.
Oh, okay.
So after they pay the $25,000 interest on the loan, they're still clearing $35,000 in profit.
And this is the wild part. They didn't even use their own money to buy the asset initially.
That's the power of leverage right there. Using other people's money, basically, to control a bigger asset and magnify your potential return.
Leverage. We hear that word a lot.
But there's another layer here that's, well, maybe even more interesting, especially when you bring taxes into it.
Taxes. How does debt affect taxes? I thought debt was just debt.
Well, first off, the loan itself, that $500,000 you borrowed, that's not considered income. So you don't pay income tax on it when you receive it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But here's the kicker. The interest you pay on that loan, the $25,000 in our example, if the debt is used for investment purposes, like buying that rental property, that interest is often tax deductible. Meaning you can subtract that $25,000 spent from your taxable income. So it actually reduces your overall tax bill. It makes the real cost of borrowing even lower than that 5% sticker price.
Wow. So they borrow money, buy an asset that makes money, and get a tax break on the cost of borrowing.
That's often how it works, yeah. It's how empires can be built, sometimes using surprisingly little of one's own initial capital and potentially lowering the tax burden along the way. It really changes the game.
It really does make you rethink things. Well, many people are focused on saving up cash to buy everything outright. The wealthy might be using debt to accelerate that process massively. But hang on, this sounds risky. It can't be that easy. There must be a catch, right? A big warning label.
Oh, absolutely. A huge one. This strategy is not for the undisciplined. Not at all.
Okay.
It only works if you are incredibly disciplined and focused. You have to be using that borrowed money for productive assets, things that reliably generate income or grow in value.
So no borrowing for just lifestyle inflation. Taking it till you make it.
Definitely not. That's the fast track to disaster with debt. This requires serious homework, understanding the asset, the market, managing cash flow meticulously. You need a plan, and you need to stick to it. Otherwise, that leverage works against you just as powerfully.
Right. It amplifies losses just as easily as gains if you're not careful.
Exactly. It's a tool, and like any powerful tool, you need to know how to use it safely and effectively.
So wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway for you listening?
I think the core message isn't run out and get into debt. And it's not even avoid all debt. It's about understanding debt, seeing it clearly, learning how to control it, how to make it work for you before it ends up controlling you.
It's shifting from fear to understanding, maybe even to strategy.
Yeah. Now think about it this way. If you hear some billionaire mention they're in debt, don't immediately assume they're in trouble. They might just be making calculated moves on a much bigger chessboard, maybe playing chess while the rest of us are still focused on checkers.
It really makes you think. How can you control debt effectively in your own life? Is there a way to use it strategically, even on a smaller scale? Something to mull over.
Definitely something to consider.